recommended to me by Wes Christian as one of the greatest minds in the field of law and naked short selling. I want to just ask you in these series of questions that we've agreed on, please just tell us briefly about your history from birth through education to current career.
Well, I've been practicing law for 43 years, specializing in commercial litigation. I've represented companies and individuals in stock fraud and market manipulation cases in both federal and state courts in New York, Georgia, Utah, Florida, Massachusetts. I've not looked at things as an academic. I've looked at things as a litigator from the trenches. And I can tell you that Wall Street is being manipulated by unscrupulous companies and individuals every day of the week.
Well, when did you first when did you first realize the difference between short selling, which is legal, and naked short selling, which is counterfeit shares and is very illegal? When in your career did you first really see this as a looming problem? I mean, I read Mark Lewis's book, Liar's Poker, in the 1980s.
Yeah.
Recently, he's done Flash Boys. And he said he'd never realized it would take this long. So when did you first get into it? And I'm trying to get a sense of the timeline of naked short selling across America for the last 20 or 30 years.
Well, that's interesting. About 12 years ago, I knew very little, if anything, about naked short selling. But I decided to invest personally in a small cap biotech company that, based on its reports, I thought was a promising investment. 3 days later, the company wound up losing maybe 30% of its market share. And I could not understand how that could possibly happen so quickly based on all of these very encouraging indicators that had existed. I then began to do a little of my own investigation and learned that at the time that the company had announced good earnings and the future promising development of a lot of their products, an enormous amount of short selling was going on. And I still at that point could not make the connection as to why, in the face of optimistic projections and strong financials, people would be interested in selling stock in the company. If anything, I would have expected them to buy. Well, at the same time, I, through a business contact, met Wes Christian, and we formed a partnership as of that point. And it was at that point that a light went off, and I began to make the connection between short selling, naked short selling, and what was going on in the marketplace.
What I really hear you saying is that there are two versions of reality. There's the version of reality that is truthful, and then there's a market manipulation version of reality that is being pushed by various forces.
Very, very true. Very, very true. And that's really the essence of market manipulation. Market manipulation involves injecting into the market false and misleading information that the average person does not know what about. And it is intended to skew the market so that prices are not going to be determined by supply and demand, but rather prices are now determined by false and misleading information that's injected into the marketplace. So, absolutely correct, Robert.
So what I hear you putting together is this is insider trading combined with tortuous interference, defamation, and other forms of assault. And it includes an ecology of, and I'm not trying to lead you, but I want you to my next question is about what's the ecology that we're dealing with. This ecology appears to include journalists who are being paid to tell lies, including in such prestigious journals as the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times. It has Twitter bashers and others. And then it has law firms that are filing solicitations for class action lawsuits that are intended to intimidate. So with this next question, let me just ask you, if you're painting a broad picture of all of the actors that are involved in a particular generic market manipulation, how would you describe that ecology of actors?
Well, I look at it, I've tried to analyze the anatomy of a market manipulation scheme. And what I have noticed is that market manipulation schemes frequently follow a similar pattern. They start with blogs or tweets or message board comments about a company by anonymous authors or authors that use pseudonyms. And it proclaims frequently, these messages, that the technology of a particular company is flawed, their products are defective, management is either corrupt or incompetent, and that their financials are false and misleading. So the rumor mill begins with these electronic postings. Thereafter, the market reacts to these comments and frequently will find the SEC or FINRA conducting investigations into the company, civil lawsuits being filed, both of which require enormous commitment of time and resources by the company. So rather than deal with the development of their products, they're preoccupied with the defense of these bogus investigations and lawsuits. I found that the confluence of these circumstances sends a signal to the market that the company shares are overvalued or that there is something wrong with their company. And this causes selling of the shares of the company to occur. It creates a snowball effect that the more people sell, the more other people are concerned and they wind up selling, and their selling after selling is part of why the stock price will drop down, not because the company is not worth investing in, but because people are manipulating the marketplace by injecting false and misleading information into the market that gives rise to the selling of the stock of that particular company. It's a vicious cycle, and it's one that small to mid-sized companies experience all the time.
Is it illegal for a journalist to tell a known lie?
Yeah. Is it illegal for a journalist to knowingly, intentionally misrepresent um, facts about a company? Well, besides the obvious ethical problem, it raises all sorts of problems. We have found that certain journalists are actually being paid to write these articles by the individuals who are engaged in the stock manipulation schemes. One can argue that they are as much of a co-conspirator as the actual individuals who are orchestrating the scheme itself.
Is it difficult to do discovery? I mean, I'm going to go to my next question on obstacles, but is it difficult for you to get at proof that the journalist was paid?
It is extraordinarily difficult to find this out, both prior to the commencement of the action and after the lawsuit is filed. It is extremely difficult to learn who is really behind all of this. Very, very difficult.
Now, you and I have talked about the importance of fiduciary duties, and I've read many accounts of victims, companies, individuals that have been they're basically helpless, but there are some things they can do. There are some things that they and their fiduciary responsibilities can execute in order to try and defend themselves in advance of naked short selling and during a naked short selling attack. What would you advise the CEO in this area?
Well, that raises a very, very interesting question about what is the fiduciary duty of directors and officers of a company. What obligation do they have to protect the shareholders and their companies from the effects of market manipulation? First, before answering that, let me explain the context in which the issue of directors' fiduciary duties come up. Robert, you've investigated this area. You're familiar with the area. I can tell you that in the last decade, statistically, the SEC says that market manipulation cases have increased 37%. The nature and scope of market manipulation schemes is limited only by the audacity and the creativity of the perpetrators. While the substance and the mechanics are frequently the same, the nature of what is attempted to be accomplished is always the same. And that is, the objective is to rig the marketplace. The proliferation of schemes has created very challenging risk management and best practice issues for the directors of companies. The shareholders have a right to expect that their boards will design and implement effective measures to protect the value of their investments from stock manipulation schemes in the marketplace. A director has a fiduciary duty of care to monitor corporate operations and business risks. Good corporate governance requires the existence of effective internal controls and risk management systems. So a director cannot sit on their hands and simply watch while their company stock is being manipulated. You will find, and I was amazed to find that certain directors take a very low-key, a very passive position when their companies are being manipulated. Why? Because they say, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't even want to find out whether our investment banking company, the firms that we're using, are involved in this. Well, that attitude, that laissez-faire attitude, would expose a director to a shareholder's derivative action for breaching their fiduciary duty of care. Directors have an affirmative duty to make sure that there are internal controls and risk management systems in place to help the company preserve the value of their shares.
Now, let me ask you this, because I'm new to this. It's only been 5 days since I started studying this issue, and I've got 60 days blocked out for this. My interpretation of that is that a company, particularly a vulnerable company, a small company that cannot afford a lot of lawyers and so forth, should be working with Share Intel and buyins.net to monitor any activities that are against their company.
Absolutely agree. Share Intel is a well-respected company in the industry who can provide invaluable assistance to a company to monitor the trading activities of that company. And I have worked with Share Intel on several matters, and they are absolutely first rate.
Well, then the other thing that comes to mind, because I've been looking at this, and one of the things I'm noticing is that there are some placement companies that mysteriously, every time they do a placement, naked short selling occurs. Is there a reasonable expectation that a CEO of a vulnerable company would know the history of I mean, H.C. Wainwright comes to mind. Every placement they do is accompanied by naked short selling. That must be a coincidence, of course. But shouldn't somebody know that?
Well, somebody should be investigating that for sure. Yes.
All right, let's move to this. I think this next question is very, very important. Now, you're helping victims, but you've encountered many obstacles. One of the biggest obstacles that jumps out to me is that when a whistleblower goes to the SEC, they turn around and make him a felon. So they counterattack. Kind of walk us through some of the obstacles to getting justice in the current system, where it seems like the U.S. government is not at all interested in protecting innovators and their inventions and their endeavors.
Well, from my perspective, I get involved when a company is being victimized, and the companies that I typically represent are small cap, newly emerging companies that have not been able to commercialize their products yet, companies that don't have a strong cash flow, companies that are required to issue stock in order to raise the necessary capital that they need to develop their products. And it is those companies that are most vulnerable to naked short selling. Naked short selling cases are fought in an arena that really pits David versus Goliath. The investment banks, brokerage firms, hedge firms have virtually unlimited resources to fight and defraud investors. These firms typically hire competent counsel and experienced law firms to wage war against the shareholders' counsel. Firms like mine, West Christian, the firms have developed a playbook almost that is routinely applied in these litigations. Um, delay, forcing these small, undercapitalized companies to spend, and spend some more in order to have a fair shot at developing their products and offering their products to the market. Companies become preoccupied with trying to resist the short selling, the naked short selling schemes, the market manipulation schemes that are being perpetrated by these major institutions who, once they are accused of wrongdoing, have virtually unlimited means to hire very competent counsel to defend them. So when you get involved in this kind of litigation, this litigation is not for the faint of heart. It's a war of attrition with these companies, and it's something that every company needs to understand when they embark upon a lawsuit against these companies.
You're inspiring several thoughts as you're speaking. I mean, at one level, I'm really recognizing that this should be a federal racketeering investigation, except that Wall Street paid Congress to take federal RICO off the table.
Yeah.
And the Holder Memorandum, this is Eric Holder of Covington and Burling, which threw General Flynn under the bus, and she was saved by Sidney Powell, God bless her, one of the greatest lawyers in America, in my humble opinion, and a pit bull who wears pearls. So it sounds like the Holder Memorandum, which took jail off the table, needs to be reversed, because right now fines are simply a cost of doing business. And last but not least, let me ask you, it seems to me we actually have two levels of naked short selling. We have the massive Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, UBS, JP Morgan proprietary trading with tens of millions of counterfeit shares. And then we have the bottom feeders, the Kenneth Griffins and Albert Leffs of the world. And these are just names I pull out of a hat. They need to be properly investigated with the due process of law. So would you say there's actually two kinds of naked short selling? One is just millions and millions of shares, and the other one is the bashers and the hired journalists and the solicitations for classified lawsuits?
I think it's I think there's both. I think you'll frequently find both individuals from both camps working together towards a common goal, which is to profit from their wrongdoing and to rig the market of that companies looking for a level playing field cannot get.
Which means that anyone with anything really cool should be looking for alternative private placements or a GoFundMe campaign.
Well, that helps in terms of raising funds, but it's hard to go into the private market time after time after time. At some point, if your stock price never rises above a certain level because the manipulators are putting downward pressure on your shares, there will come a point in time where it may be difficult to raise the capital that you need in private placements. It's a very serious problem.
It's clear to me, and we'll have a final question on what needs to be done, but it's clear to me that this needs to be a major federal racketeering investigation with the full power of the federal government focused on discovering the data inside of the companies, which is now withheld. So this next question is extremely important. As I've gotten into this, what I've learned is that most Americans think that Wall Street is a rich man's game, and that it doesn't matter to them. Most Americans don't understand that the pension funds have lost 2/3 of their value. And they don't understand that the $100 trillion or so, which is one estimate of what has been stolen from the pension funds, has in fact hurt the average American worker. Do you have any thoughts on how to explain to the average American that this is very much a widows and orphans crime against humanity?
The stock market is a rigged crap game and affects all investors, rich or poor. Every investor has the right to rely on a market that's efficient and not being manipulated. Naked short selling adversely affects all investors, like teachers, policemen, firemen, construction workers, who have bought stock through their pension or profit sharing plans and see the value of their investments diminish as a result of the greed and manipulative activities of these individuals who are manipulating, engaged in stock manipulation schemes. One of the outrageous situations that I find concerns what's going on today with the COVID virus. Here you have nurses, doctors, technicians, first line responders, people who are committed to saving the lives of people, some of whom are the very people who are engaged in this manipulation. It is outrageous, nothing short of outrageous, that these people are able to get away with what they're doing to hardworking people who are not rich, but have done their absolute best to try to create a retirement fund, and see, because of the greed of these manipulators, the value of their retirement fund destroyed. It's an outrageous situation, and it's one that, frankly, I've been trying to help do my share to rectify this problem. But it's a challenge.
I completely agree with you, and one of the problems, I think, is not only do the firemen, policemen, and nurses not really understand that there is this $100 trillion theft against their pension funds, but they also don't read people like Matt Taibbi, who's done a very fine job in Rolling Stone and his book, Griftopia, on the merger between political and financial crime and the divide on one law for the rich, one law for the poor. The people, the victims, are not reading this stuff. So I think we need, and there was an excellent video, I'll hold it up here, The Wall Street Conspiracy, which features Wes and others. It didn't gain traction because it didn't tell the widows and orphans harm story. And that's part of what I, as a citizen, am trying to do with this nonprofit endeavor over the next 60 days. So here is my final question. So if President Trump, who I understand is taking an interest in this, he understands that his economy is being wrecked by Wall Street. So if you could talk to him for just a few minutes about how to make America great again by eradicating naked short selling, what very concise bullet points would you give this great man as you're speaking?
Commit more resources to prosecuting individuals and companies, both criminally and civilly. Civil fines and penalties that are imposed in administrative proceedings are viewed as the cost of doing business by these companies. In fact, Judge Jed Rakoff, a well-respected federal district court in the Southern District of New York, observed exactly that the imposition of fines and penalties does not deter these investment banks and market makers and hedge funds from continuing to engage in this kind of unlawful activity. I believe that unless you pass laws that expand shareholder rights and vigorously prosecute under the existing laws these wrongdoers criminally, there's not going to be a material change in how Wall Street does business. Wall Street is about money, and Wall Street is about how can we make as much money as possible. Sometimes they engage in unlawful practices, and unless and until some executive winds up going to jail for engaging in this kind of practice of naked short selling, I'm not sure that we're going to see an improvement in the marketplace. President Trump is serious about making America great again. A commitment along these lines, I believe, is what's required.
That's utterly brilliant. And I might even be able to make that a little extract that we circulate separately. I consider cases like Bernie Madoff and Martha Stewart to be tokenism, lip service. I also believe that we have to hold the partners of Morgan Stanley and I was about to say Lehman Brothers. They got naked short sold.
Yeah.
Merrill Lynch and others, so forth. Is there any final words you would say to the American people to say, pay attention to this? What's your one-liner for your grandson? Son, you got to pay attention.
Yeah, you do have to pay attention. You work long and hard to accumulate a modicum of wealth. Do not allow greedy, manipulative, selfish fraudsters take away from you and your families what you have worked extraordinarily hard to achieve.
God bless you, sir. God bless all of you watching. God bless America. And God bless the President of the United States of America.
Thank you.